a creature so violent that entire Tennessee towns abandoned their homes in 1877. The media called it the Wildman, but recently uncovered evidence suggests something far more disturbing was lurking in those Appalachian forests. The mountains of Tennessee have always whispered secrets, but some secrets scream back. Deep in McNairy County, something has been lurking since the 1800s. Early settlers called it the Tennessee Wildman, and honestly, they weren't being creative with names back then. These weren't city folks jumping at shadows either. These were people who knew every sound the forest could make. They could tell a bear grunt from a wildcat snarl with their eyes closed. Yet when those bone-chilling screams echoed through the Appalachian hollows, even the toughest woodsman went pale. The sound didn't match anything in nature's catalog. Not a cougar, not a wolf, definitely not human. Though it carried something disturbingly familiar in its pitch. What spooked people most wasn't just the screaming, it was the watching. Settlers reported a massive hair-covered figure observing them from tree lines and ridgetops, always just far enough away to make you question what you saw, but close enough to make your skin crawl. This thing stood upright like a man but towered over any human they'd ever seen. Its movements were too fluid, too purposeful to be a bear standing on hind legs. Then there's the timing of these encounters. The wild man seemed to prefer twilight hours, that eerie space between day and night when shadows play tricks and common sense takes a coffee break. Makes sense, right? Nothing good ever happens at dusk in the mountains. But here's where it gets interesting. The Cherokee and other native tribes weren't surprised by these stories at all. They'd been talking about wild beings in these exact woods for generations before any European ever set foot in Tennessee. Their legends spoke of forest dwellers who existed somewhere between human and beast, creatures that belonged to the wilderness in ways civilized people never could. Local folklore quickly adapted, weaving practical warnings into spine-tingling tales. Certain hollows became off-limits after dark. Specific trails earned reputations that kept even experienced hunters away. Parents used wildman stories to keep children from wandering too far into the woods, though honestly, the genuine dangers of mountain wilderness were scary enough without adding monsters to the mix. The weird part is how consistent these early accounts were. Different families, scattered across remote areas, describing the same basic creature, same general size, same unsettling behavior patterns. Same terrifying vocalizations echoing through valleys that should have been empty. Weather-beaten mountain folk weren't known for their imagination or their love of tall tales just for entertainment. They dealt with reality every day. Harsh winters, dangerous wildlife, isolation that could kill you if you weren't prepared. When people like that start talking about something they can't explain, something that makes them genuinely afraid, you pay attention. These weren't campfire ghost stories designed to get a cheap thrill. These were warnings passed between neighbors, serious conversations about something real enough to change how people lived their daily lives. Well, those early whispers were just the beginning. The real terror started when the newspapers got involved and people began documenting exactly what this creature could do. The year was 1871, and the Memphis Public Ledger wasn't known for wild tales or made-up stories. Yet there it was in black and white, a creature standing 7 feet tall with blazing red eyes, lurking in the Tennessee wilderness. The newspaper described something that defied explanation, something that made even the toughest mountain folk lock their doors at night. But this wasn't just about height and glowing eyes. This thing had attitude. Local farmers started losing cattle, finding their livestock torn apart in ways that didn't match bear attacks or wolf kills. The wounds were different, stranger. Like something with human-like intelligence had done the killing, but with the raw power of a wild beast. Women bore the brunt of the terror, and their stories paint a horrifying picture. They'd be walking home from town or tending gardens when the screaming would start. Not howling like a wolf or roaring like a bear, screaming like a person in agony. The wild man would approach them with these blood-curdling shrieks, getting closer and closer until the women fled in panic. Makes you wonder what it actually wanted, right? Here's where it gets interesting though. Armed men told completely different stories. When hunters or farmers with rifles encountered the creature, it didn't stick around to chat. The thing would take one look at a loaded weapon and disappear into the thick mountain brush faster than you'd expect something that size to move. Smart enough to recognize a threat, strong enough to kill cattle, but apparently not interested in a fair fight. Then there's the cave discovery that still gives people chills. A group of hunters tracking deer stumbled across what they swore was the wild man's lair. Deep in a rocky outcrop, they found a cave filled with animal bones, not just scattered remains, but piles of them. Skulls, ribs, leg bones from deer, cattle, and smaller creatures all stacked like some twisted pantry. The smell alone drove them back, but not before they noticed something unsettling. Some bones showed tool marks, as if they'd been deliberately cleaned and arranged. Local Cherokee guides refused to go near that particular cave. They'd point toward it from a distance and shake their heads, using words that roughly translated to place of the hungry shadow. Even tribes with centuries of forest experience wanted nothing to do with whatever lived there. Fast forward to today, and hikers in places like the Great Smoky Mountains still report hearing sounds that don't belong. Park rangers get calls about unusual vocalizations that wildlife experts can't identify. These aren't tourist tales or campfire stories. They're coming from experienced outdoors people who know the difference between a bear grunt and something else entirely. The weird part is how consistent these modern reports are with those 1800s accounts. Same impossible size, same intelligent behavior, same bone-chilling screams echoing through the hollows. It's like the wild man hasn't evolved or changed its habits in over 150 years. What made this creature so enduring in Tennessee folklore, though, runs deeper than just scary encounters and mysterious caves. The Tennessee Wildman didn't just appear out of nowhere in 1871. This legend has roots that dig deep into both Old World mythology and Native American tradition, creating something uniquely American but familiar enough to terrify anyone. European settlers brought their own baggage to Tennessee's mountains, and we're not talking about wooden trunks. For centuries, European folklore had been filled with stories of wild men living beyond civilization's reach. These weren't friendly forest dwellers. They were hairy, primitive beings who represented everything civilized people feared about the wilderness. When settlers encountered Tennessee's vast, untamed forests, those old fears found new soil to grow in. But here's where it gets interesting. The Cherokee were already telling similar stories. Long before any Europeans set foot in these mountains, Cherokee oral tradition spoke of mysterious beings dwelling in the deepest parts of the forest. These weren't exactly the same as the European wild man, but close enough that when cultures mixed, the stories began blending together like ingredients in some supernatural stew. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for a legend to take root. After the Civil War, waves of new settlers pushed deeper into Tennessee's mountains than ever before. These folks were already on edge, trying to survive in harsh, unfamiliar territory. Every strange sound at night became something worth fearing. Every unexplained track in the mud became evidence of something lurking just beyond their campfires. Then there's the uncomfortable reality that some wild man stories might have had a grain of truth. The mountains were full of hermits, deserters, and people who'd simply walked away from civilization for one reason or another. A few years of living rough in the woods could make anyone look pretty wild. But separating fact from fiction became impossible once the stories started growing. And grow they did, especially thanks to traveling circuses and sideshows. These entertainment outfits loved claiming they'd captured a genuine wild man from the Tennessee mountains. Of course, it was usually just some poor soul they'd convince to growl and act primitive for paying crowds. But every fake wild man on display made the real legend seem more believable back home. The genius of the wild man legend was how it pulled from everywhere. European fears, Cherokee wisdom, Civil War trauma, circus showmanship, all mixed together in Tennessee's isolated mountain communities where stories had time to ferment and change. Each telling added new details. Each generation made the creature a little bigger, a little scarier, a little more real. What made this legend stick wasn't just fear, it was usefulness. Parents could keep kids close to home by mentioning the wild man. Adults could explain away strange sounds without admitting they were scared. The legend served a purpose beyond simple entertainment. But as these stories spread from cabin to cabin, something else was happening. The wild man was becoming more than just a scary story. It was becoming a symbol of everything wild and dangerous about Tennessee's mountains themselves. The Tennessee Wildman became more than just a scary story. It turned into something deeper, weaving itself into the very fabric of Appalachian life. Parents used tales of the creature to keep their children close to home after dark. Don't go past the creek, they'd warn. The wild man might be watching. Makes sense, right? The mountains held real dangers: bears, wildcats, steep cliffs, and easy ways to get lost forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The wild man's description kept changing with each telling. One family might describe a 7-foot giant with glowing red eyes. Another would swear it had massive claws and teeth like a wolf. The creature grew more terrifying each time someone shared the story around a campfire or kitchen table. Well, that's how legends work. They're living things that grow and change. Specific places became haunted by the wild man's reputation. The Boogerman Trail in the Smokies didn't get that name by accident. Local folks connected certain hollows, caves, and ridges to sightings. These spots carried an extra weight of fear and respect. Hunters would avoid certain areas entirely, not wanting to risk an encounter with whatever lurked there. And the weird part is how these stories reflected deeper feelings about nature itself. The mountains were beautiful but brutal. They provided food, shelter, and livelihood, yet they could kill you without warning. The wild man embodied this contradiction perfectly. The part human, part wild beast, completely unpredictable. It represented everything settlers couldn't control or understand about their harsh environment. Then there's the practical side nobody talks about much. These tales served as an early warning system. Areas where people reported wildman sightings often had legitimate dangers, unstable ground, predator dens, or places where folks had actually gone missing. The legend became a way to mark dangerous territory without admitting you were scared of perfectly normal wilderness hazards. Let's not forget how the Civil War era shaped these stories too. Tennessee's mountains crawled with deserters, outlaws, and broken men trying to disappear. Some hermits really did live wild in caves and abandoned cabins. The line between actual dangerous humans and mythical creatures blurred easily in people's minds. A glimpse of a ragged, unwashed man in the forest could become a wild man sighting by the time it reached town. Local communities embraced the mystery because it made them special. Every settlement wanted their own version of the legend. It gave people something unique to share with outsiders, a piece of local identity that couldn't be found anywhere else. The wild man became Tennessee mountain pride wrapped up in fear and folklore. Churches sometimes used the creature in sermons about staying on the righteous path. Stray too far from civilization and godliness, preachers warned, and you might end up like the wild man, neither human nor animal, lost between worlds forever. But would these old mountain stories survive in a modern world? Something interesting was about to happen to the Tennessee Wildman legend that nobody saw coming. Here's something wild about the Tennessee Wildman. People are still seeing it, not just hearing old stories from their grandparents, but actually claiming fresh encounters in 2023 and 2024. Makes you wonder what's really out there, right? Modern sightings pop up on social media with surprising regularity. Hikers post blurry photos on Instagram. Trail runners share weird encounters on TikTok. The descriptions haven't changed much either. Still that same 7-foot-tall hairy figure watching from tree lines. But now these stories spread faster than wildfire through internet forums and cryptid hunting groups. Scientists, meanwhile, remain completely unimpressed. No physical evidence has ever surfaced that matches the wild man's supposed characteristics. No bones, no hair samples, no clear photographs, despite everyone carrying high-definition cameras in their pockets. Wildlife biologists point out that Tennessee's largest predator is the black bear, which explains most mysterious sightings when people catch glimpses through thick forest undergrowth. Then there's the festival circuit. The wild man has become Tennessee tourism gold. Small mountain towns host cryptid festivals, complete with wild man costume contests and guided monster hunts through local trails. Gift shops sell wild man t-shirts and coffee mugs. Local restaurants name burgers after the beast. It's turned folklore into cold, hard cash. Podcasters love this stuff too. True crime shows mix wild man episodes between serial killer stories. Paranormal investigators pack expensive equipment into Tennessee forests, hoping to capture the definitive proof that's eluded everyone for over 150 years. The legend feeds itself, growing stronger with each retelling. But here's where it gets interesting. The wild man serves a deeper purpose than just spooking tourists. It connects modern Tennesseans to their Appalachian roots. When kids hear these stories around campfires, they're absorbing the same cautionary tales that shaped their great-great-grandparents. The beast represents something unchanging in a world that's constantly shifting. Local historians argue the wild man reflects our complex relationship with wilderness. We've paved most of the frontier, but something in us still craves the mystery of untamed places. The creature embodies that tension between civilization and the wild spaces we haven't quite conquered. And the weird part is, new evidence keeps surfacing. Hunters find unusual footprints. Campers record strange howls that don't match known animal calls. Security cameras occasionally capture shadowy figures that believers swear prove the wild man exists. Skeptics dismiss everything as misidentification or hoaxes, but the reports never stop coming. The debate rages on internet forums and barroom conversations across Tennessee. Is the wild man a surviving prehistoric human? An undiscovered primate species? Just bears and wild boars glimpsed through frightened eyes? Well, maybe that's missing the point entirely. The Tennessee Wildman might be more valuable as mystery than as fact. It keeps us humble about what we don't know. It preserves the idea that some corners of our world remain unexplored, untamed, and thoroughly capable of surprising us. Whether the Wildman roams Tennessee's mountains or lives only in our collective imagination, one thing's certain: the legend isn't going anywhere.